So let's talk about a little bit about the genesis of this thought process to talk about what it means to reach out to people in the community and understand why people left. It's a very compelling book. I don't know. I've had this copy for a long time. Since November, I did a message that was based on this book. So I said, I really want to buy that book, and I got into it, got to thinking about it, and said, let's have these conversations. Combined with some other efforts to just kind of find out what it is that we need to be in the community. Do you guys need me to stand somewhere, or are we okay? You got okay, very fine. And so I do want to make some very. You can see the introduction. It is taken right from the message that I shared with you. You can see that. The fact that 40 million people have left the church. Now, when the church is all churches in the last 25 years, and they write that more than half of more people have left the church in the last 25 years than all the new people who became Christians from the first Great Awakening, second Great Awakening, and the Billy Graham Crusades combined. Any of you involved with the Billy Graham Crusades? We probably weren't around for those other ones. So, yep. What's that? The Billy Graham. Oh, you remember the Billy Graham Crusades, yes, as do I. Here, honey. Yes. Yes, this is an American. This is, this was, and it's really interesting, and you can read, it gets a little deeper than probably what for our purposes, and really for what I want to get us to get out of this, is that this is a study that was conducted by pastors in an evangelical church, very conservative evangelical church, because they're finally feeling what we felt in the 70s. Remember I said during the message that we began, the United Methodist Church, mainline churches, began to de-church in the 70s, some of us. And so it's hit them, but... and it's been complicated by, COVID-19 for the past 4 years has really just completely decimated churches. It's been very hard to come back from that isolation. Oddly enough, one of the things that really are affecting people mental health wise in all churches in all walks of life is loneliness. So people stop coming to church, but they're not coming back to battle the loneliness in their lives. It's just kind of this interesting thing that I'm kind of making from my own observations in it. So I want to say a couple things. So this comes from the standpoint of evangelical Christian churches. There are two things they wanted to come up with four profiles, and they developed four. But then there was another profile that came up out of that, and that's called the BIPOC people. That's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Was one that it was not. They didn't write their algorithm in their research to identify that group, but it self-identified through the research itself. Now that goes above and beyond my understanding, but they found out that was a huge group of people that is beginning to de-church, and. So what I would want us to do is to study and know. Today we're going to talk about the 5 different groups, and then to take that study, find out where do we sit in the theological realm that will welcome people who have de-churched. The next point I want you to know is we are talking about de-churched people, not unchurched people. These are people who were active in the church at one time, and they no longer are. So the difference being, unchurched are people who never went to church. So how do we bring people back? And we can look at it and say, well, gee, that sounds easier than trying to get unchurched people. It's probably not. In fact, there's one full group, and we'll talk about it in just a minute, that has no intention of coming back, at least to the evangelical church. They're not coming back to what they were familiar with. So I said, well, is this good news for the more progressive churches? Does that mean that we would attract those people in a better way? And I think that might be, as we kind of look for the commonalities. So let's look at these let's look at these. I just mentioned as part of the sermon, I have talked with people from all size churches, and they make a huge point in the beginning of the book of saying that this dechurching of the last 25 years has affected all churches. There isn't any type of church or denomination that has not been affected by what has happened in the last 25 years. That includes the mega churches, that includes the large churches that are around us. But there is going to be good news in this. We may not get to it today because we're just going to kind of identify the dechurched in many ways. So let's move on to the 5 profiles. You'll see that the 5 profiles, I did not summarize them before saying that, but there's cultural Christian. I shouldn't have. Just a minute. Can you hear me now? Do we have people still with us? We do. Okay. Hello, friends. Hi, Abby. I sure did, didn't I? Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So we have the church cultural Christians, de-church mainstream evangelicals, ex-evangelicals, de-church BIPOCs, the black, indigenous, and people of color, and then finally the de-church mainline Protestant and Catholic churches, which is us. So let's look first at the cultural Christians. This is the largest part of this of the profile group. It's 52% of all de-churched evangelicals. They are average age of 50. They're apathetic and demonstrate very little evidence that they are Christian. They are at the lower end of orthodoxy. Now, orthodoxy for the purpose of this study is defined as the adherence to the bare essentials of our Christian faith expressed in the Nicene Creed. So that's what they're using, just so that you know that they're saying, what they're saying is that belief, orthodoxy, not orthopraxy, which is the practice of our faith, coming to church, but what do they believe? And we should probably remember and not get too hoity as church-going people that it is our belief that saves us, right? I mean, Jesus said it is our faith that saves us. They are average age of 50. They're apathetic. They demonstrate very little evidence that they are Christian. Cultural Christians they're most religious during their late 20s, and they're at the higher end of education and income. And then institutions, and this is a very interesting part of this study, is where they looked at where institutions were supportive of certain lifestyles or certain belief systems. So the government, the economy, education system, media, and healthcare all work well for this group of people, meaning that they grow up in the church, they go to college, they get a job, they get married, they have families, they're getting their insurance, the system is working for them. It does not work for all people. They are centered at the political left, being moderately pro-choice. It's all right there in front of you. And the reason this group left the church are social and experiential. Many have negative experience of church. Over half the cultural Christians are willing to come back to church now if invited. They want healthy churches that teach the Bible as well as creeds and confessions. So this, I think in terms of the research itself, they're trying to say, look, orthodoxy, you need to have a set of beliefs that people must adhere to in order to come back to a church and be fulfilled. That's what I'm getting. I know several have read the book as well, so correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm going off track here. But it is one creed, so it's the basics. We believe in God. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in the Holy Spirit. We believe in the church. The other, within the creeds, and I would say all creeds. Nicene is a really long creed, but the virgin birth, that God created the world, that the church is ordained by God to be ambassadors in the world. All those sort of beliefs are there. So the cultural Christians, they will come back to church if invited, but they want them to be healthy churches that teach the Bible as well as creeds and confession. Now, the good news is for us who are mainline, and we'll get to mainline, this is a side comment, is that we we have regained, I believe, over 40 years of my ministry, we've regained our biblical literacy. It used to be in the 70s that we were a very biblically illiterate country and denomination. Mainline churches and Roman Catholic churches are very similar in that we're not biblically literate. We trusted the experts to be the conveyors of the Bible rather than, have access to our Bibles ourselves and study them in groups and that sort of thing. So that, I think, started in the 70s and 80s. By the time I went to seminary in the early 80s, we had reclaimed for those of you who are Lutheran or Catholic, the lectionary. We reclaimed the lectionary to be the way in which we taught preaching, and therefore we got back that biblical literacy. We, as United Methodists, have always been pretty proud that we've called ourselves a non-doctrinal church. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is not one set of doctrines that we adhere to. There's not one set of creed or a creed that we adhere to. So there is some openness in terms of beliefs in the United Methodist Church. We've always been that way, at least in my experience. So you can have disagreements with the church. I remember teaching membership classes early in my ministry that, I don't know if I agree with the church on that. And I said, yeah, along with a lot of other people here. And we always likened it to our nation itself, saying, look, do you like everything our nation is doing? Well, nobody says yes to that question, So how do we live together with our differences, and how do we live together and make a difference in the world, even though we have some different ideas about our faith? So you might believe in the Transfiguration as an actual event, and some people might say, well, no, that was more of a symbolic awakening of the disciples. I don't argue that. I'm pretty open about that. God does miracles. I believe that. I really, truly do. I don't have to have some natural explanation for what I read as miracles in the scriptures. But some people really have a problem with that. They say, well, I don't know if that's what happened. It's the faith that results that is primary in their experience. Is that making some sense to you or no? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yeah. Or at least clear about that. Yeah. Yeah.
We have some people that stayed on the live stream.
Yeah.
If you could pass the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Okay. So the question. Thank you. So the question was, what camera are we using here? That one? This one? That one? That's one? Okay. Yeah. So the question was, are they willing to come back to the church if the church knows who they are and has a strong identity? I think that's exactly where we're getting to with this with cultural Christians. They're not going to come back unless it's going to be meaningful, but they also want us to be engaged with. Each of these two or three paragraphs for each of this represents about 20 pages of information on this. Lots of charts and graphs. So yes, I believe that's exactly, you're right on target with that. That they want a church that knows what they believe, who they are, and are moving forward. And I think for us, and you were part of the group that led it, was the creation of our inclusion statement over a year ago now, that I believe we need to give it a little more, we need to put that out there a little more. And I have talked to some folks about what that might look like in the near future, and focusing on that probably during the season of Lent, using a statement of inclusion to begin our services. Yeah, Mike.
What jumped out at me in this was that it says, many have had negative experience of the church. And what negative experience do they have? What is that? I have another question for much later on probably, and I'm sitting here wondering, are we looking at what has happened in Europe and comparing up? Because it seems to me this happened in Europe decades before here. And I'm wondering if we're looking to learn any lessons from that.
That's a really interesting question. No, it's not in the book as far as I read. You read the book, Debbie? I did not see that. No. I don't believe that's part of it. I've read all of it. I've only marked half of it, but I don't think, no. So let's talk about some of why the reasons, the problems that they had leaving. Let me see if I can find one of those really nifty charts that they had. Let's see. They do too much. Okay. So the cultural Christians, as they're saying, they left it was almost a generational conflict. And so they kind of discovered that, and they said, so this one chart that they have is, what did your parents do that played a role in your decision to stop attending? And some of them said all of their emphasis was on the culture war was lost on me. Where the church was supposed to be anti-culture, and they lost that. They didn't like that part of their parents' thought process. A lack of love, gentleness, kindness, and generosity in the church. Misogynistic attitudes and actions, hypocritical attitudes or actions. My parents stopped believing. Let's go through reasons for not attending church in this. Was my friends were not attending. Attending was inconvenience. Suffering changed my view of God. I wanted to express my gender identity. I moved to a new community. Scandals involving clergy. I mean, name a problem. I've had some pastor friends that say that many, those who leave, it's just a justification for people leaving and kind of poo-pooing it. If you're going to look for problems in the church, you'll find them, and then they'll leave. That's not an excuse, and that's kind of on us. There are certain reasons that people leave the church, and some of them are really valid, especially the abuse issues. I mean, the abuse issues of the past, what would I say, 20 years that have come to light, but they've always been there. I'm certain. So we've had to deal with that too. So people have lost faith in the church. So that's the cultural Christians. They are a lot of them leave because of things that their folks are getting involved with in terms of sports on Sunday morning. I've had people saying, I hope my grandkids will continue to go to church, but they're not because they're involved in sports now. Well, hard to fight that cultural thing, but culturally they believe they're Christians, and we may want to look at it. I remember being challenged, just as a side note, by a fellow pastor. He was Nazarene in background, and he said, Jack, if you could have church any time of the week, anytime, he says, not Sunday morning, that's kind of a given, but if you could have church on any time, I got to think about it, and I looked at him, and I said, Thursday nights. He said, bingo. Because he agreed with that thought process. My thought was that it's before the weekend, and anecdotally, when our daughter went to Western Michigan University, guess when their Wesley Foundation student parish worshipped? Thursday night. It's just kind of interesting. Yeah. You had a question, Sally? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
We're talking about Christians. How did they break out all these categories? Because you said the Protestants and the Methodists are the mainline Protestants. We're not cultural Christians or evangelicals. How did they classify all these different people? Because if I go to one church my whole life and I don't know where it would fall on this, and I get dissatisfied, I can always go search out a different form of worship or something. So I guess we're Christian. How did they get these 5 categories is my question.
Well, that would probably be a much longer discussion. There's about 30 pages. I will let you borrow my book and you can discover that for yourself. They worked with, I can't remember, they worked with a guy out of Kansas City University who is a statistics guy, and let me see. I don't know if I'm going to get you an answer today, but I will look it up and try to get back with you. But understand that they're looking at this from a new perspective of the last 25 years because they're evangelical Christians. I mean, they're typically what they're called conservative churches. I mean, if you can unpack that, I think it's much more complex than that. My thing is just to take what we can learn from this and see what are the commonalities, and then what do we want to do to try to attract people back into the church? Yeah. Evie, wait. You just want to hold the microphone. I'm going to hold that microphone, okay, honey? But Teresa has a question. I will look at that.
Well, not so much a question as a thought, but you said this started in the 70s and 80s for the main line. Yeah, before that, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, there. We got that out of the way. So back then, let's look at what was happening culturally and the letdown from the government, the letdown from standardized, in the 70s and 80s, people were not believing in the social structures as they were in the past. And I think that kind of bled out into the church. But on a positive note, I have noticed, like with this church specifically, we're becoming more inclusive. And a lot of the reason my friends and my generation did leave the church is that we didn't understand it. We were raised in a church that was made for adults as children, and it was confusing. And then our parents were just trying to survive and ended up, like mine just stopped going to church because there was just no time. It was the excuse that they used. And it took me a long time to realize I can't do this on my own. So that's why I came back.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Yeah. Thank you. We'll take a look at that. Let's look at de-church mainstream evangelicals, and this is where they look at themselves. The people who are doing this research. This group is different from others profiled in terms of having the highest orthodoxy score. That means that they believe in everything that the Nicene Creed says. Their average age is 40 as compared to 50 of the mainstream evangelicals that still attend church. This whole grouping here was how they kept comparing the de-churched mainstream evangelicals with the churched mainstream evangelicals. I don't know why in research you've got a PhD in. So I don't understand some of why the research kept mentioning this. But anyway, so they must have they most have left the church because of circumstances and inconvenience. COVID-19, travel sports, divorce, a new baby, moving their home. These de-church people have better mental health. Now, get this, the de-church people, I found this interesting. So I threw in what I thought was interesting and maybe salacious in terms of, the de-church people have better mental health than their church-attending counterparts. And this group dropped out of church about 24 years ago, 4 years ago, 2020. There's another group that started at the beginning of this century. So 100% of de-churched mainstream evangelicals are willing to return to an evangelical church. And there's 4 avenues of return, and I thought this was interesting, and for our purposes. They have a social on-ramp of making new friends and spouses that want to return to church. There's a church on-ramp of missing church and finding a good church or pastor. Third is the God on-ramp of hearing from God and lamenting distance from God. And fourth, philosophy of ministry of on-ramp of finding a church that takes doctrine and ethics seriously, or one that prioritizes justice and compassion for the vulnerable. When I read this description of why they would return to church and what their on-ramps were, I thought, okay, it sort of sounds like our mission statement, right? You're going to connect with God, or you can connect with people. That was intentional when we put that all together, and those 2 major on-ramps then get you into an area of understanding and working together to change our world with Christ's love. That was what was meant by that mission statement. So I think we've got at least a sense of where are the on-ramps, where are the connection points with churches, and that's maybe very helpful for us. That's the de-church mainstream evangelicals. I think that because they were feeling the pain of these last 4 years, these guys got together and said, we've got to figure out what's happening out there, and that's when this project got launched by them. This book was published just last year, so this is fairly new findings and fairly new things that they've been wanting us to get out there. Ex-evangelicals breaks your hearts. This is an incredible group of people. This group comprises 17% of the dechurched evangelicals and described as dechurched casualties. They are 82% white, 13% black, 2% Hispanic, 65% female, and 35% male. They're primarily dechurched over the last 20 years. They are politically independent with political affiliations at center left, while they are concerned about progressive issues that are critical of socialism, democratic socialism, Marxism, and communism. 100%. This is 100% of ex-evangelicals will never return to any evangelical church, but surprisingly, they are the second most orthodox subgroup of the dechurch spectrum. This is sort of your secular Christians, you might say. I know that they have this cultural Christian, but I almost would say these are your secular Christians. That's another phrase. There's so many phrases that get kicked around when you read different studies. American institutions do not work for this group of people. You know, marriage, police, democracy has not treated them well. They are also victims of the church failing them. They have fallen through the cracks, feeling behind relationally, socially, politically, to name a few examples. Again, one of the reasons they left, they didn't feel that they were loved there. They didn't. Dechurching accelerates for this group in their teens and their 20s. So these are some of the kids that didn't find a place of belonging in the church, and they're not willing to return to an evangelical church. And if a church and clergy were willing to be attentive to ex-evangelicals, they may respond to fresh expressions of the Christian faith. So to me, that's sort of, there are groups of people that are represented in this study that I say, we're their church. We could be their church. I get kind of excited about that. And we're going to have to find out how we can engage with those Christians. Dechurched, the BIPOC folk, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, they did not, however they do their algorithms, and this is far beyond my ability to understand fully, they did not create an algorithm for ethnicity of race. However, this group of dechurched people emerged nonetheless. So they aren't really considered one of their four groups that they were trying to define and study, but this group kind of popped up as a little bit of a surprise. They're the smallest subgroup. The men are by far the most educated and affluent of any of the dechurched categories. They also represent the highest employment rate of the subgroups, and their average age is 52. So they created a profile of a person who was influenced by African descendants of slaves, Afro-Caribbeans, and white cultural spaces. So these are people of color who are living in primarily white communities. It's really surprising that this group feels that racial problems in the U.S. are rare and isolated situations. They're high-functioning subgroups, the lowest scores of mental health indicators, though, and this may be connected to generational discontinuity and mistrust. This group dechurched in the early 2000s, so they've been dechurching for almost 25 years now. They are willing to return to the evangelical church. They are primarily, and I keep using that because that's what their study is saying. They did this for themselves, but I think we as a mainline church we'll get something out of this study for ourselves. 65% of them would be willing to return to the evangelical church. They're primarily interested in relational issues within the church, desiring a sense of belonging. So, do they belong here? When I was reading this and putting this together, I'm wondering about our members. I'm looking here. We're all white folk here. I don't know who's with us at home, but I wonder about our small group of people of color who are coming to this church, and do they have that sense of belonging here? My sense is, I've spent time with them. We go out to have a cup of coffee and we talk about, I ask them straight up, what is it about our church and this old white guy pastor that you are finding yourself comfortable here? And they just feel comfortable. They like being here. We are a welcoming and warm church regardless race. There have been people who have been here in the past where they haven't always felt that. I know that. I've been here a long time. I've been here 11 years, and I know that some people have told me, I don't feel welcomed here. It's not a place for me as a person of color. So what does, this group of people is a group I'm interested in. I find it very interesting that they kind of chastise themselves in the study, in the book, saying, we didn't see this group. And yet, here they are. And so they have a place. Yeah, Ruth. Yeah, oh, yes.
Listening to the description of this group who isn't aware of racial problems in the United States, but our kids went to school in Troy, and there were 86 different languages that they spoke in the schools there. So it's a very ethnically diverse community, but it's not a income diverse community. And that's what this group sounded like. They were well-educated, great jobs, great living situations, far from the other people in their culture and their color who are having great problems,
The cultural shift for the Mannschrecks as we came to this area was, there were, 86 different languages spoken in the city of Troy and in the school system, and but here I think I was told at the very one of the I always go to the state of the township. I always try to go to that to learn what's happening here in our township. And they were talking, hey, there's 67 different languages spoken in the township of Waterford. But what is different between Troy and here is the economic width and differences here. So, and we are a school of choice, and we have a lot of folk who come to us from Pontiac and the surrounding area as well. That's my understanding, anyway. Do we have any teachers here in the school system? It is, yeah. Right. Okay. So, but it's so we have a larger economic, which is frankly another I don't want to say attribute that causes division, and it's just another complication in terms of folk here. We have a lot of people who come to us for help, and the vast majority of them are people of color, but not all. And we are serving a very underserved area, and we have a lot of partner ministries, and for that reason, I think that Micah 6 and Baldwin Center and Grace Center of Hope are all areas that kind of indicate that where we need help and everything. Yeah, so that's the church, that group of BIPOC. They say it BIPOC group of people. Interesting. So then there's the Dechurch mainline Protestants and Catholics. This is us, friends. This is us as United Methodists. It's surprising that the findings of the studies, there were very little difference between Protestants and Catholics in this profile. So that means their adherence, that orthodoxy scale that everybody's on, that we are very similar to Roman Catholics in terms of our orthodoxy, what we believe in terms of the Nicene Creed. So there's some awareness there that we are together. The reasons this group leave the church are not so different from the cultural Christians, that is, moving to new communities, other priorities, and not fitting in. Now you're seeing that again, and this is one of my thought processes. I in terms of engaging, and we'll get into this, but this is where I think our church would be very good at in terms of really being welcoming to people who are in transition. In terms of they've moved, they're new schools, they're for whatever reasons, divorce. these are areas of transition that we could probably be a very meaningful presence in the life of people who are dechurched. That they don't want to, that they stopped going to church. Low orthodoxy score, I said that the church began in the 70s. So now you're talking some time ago, right? I mean, in the 50 years ago now. And some people say, well, that was we're the mainline church. We're getting ahead of ourselves, and that we experienced, because we held a different view of Scripture, of orthodoxy, of adherence, being a non-doctrinal denomination, as we've sometimes been identified as, that other churches are finding that you can't hold a hard line and still have a meaningful presence for people. Does that make sense? Like we can't. If you say, "Here's our line," no one crosses it ever, then you set yourself up to say, "Well, there's a time where we got to say goodbye to people, or let them go," rather than continue to be inviting and having them come to be a part of a meaningful fellowship with us. So I just wanted to get these 5 groups of people out in front. I will try to do the homework before our next time, Sally, in terms of how they did their things. It gets way too deep into the weeds in terms of charts and all that, but I'll try to get that flushed out for you. I just have 5 conclusions and surprises. That dechurching began with mainline Protestant churches and then moved on to the Catholic Church and then and is now an evangelical phenomenon. There's get this is a very big surprise that they talk about this several times in the book, that increased education decreases the likelihood of dechurching. So that the old anecdote, well, you go to college and you get an education and God doesn't matter anymore, is kind of debunked by their study, saying that no, it's educated people are less likely to dechurch. Politically, dechurched evangelicals lean center-right, whereas mainline and Catholic counterparts lean center-left. That should probably be no surprise. Most groups will tune out those who have difficulty separating their faith and politics, especially in the vein of Christian nationalism, xenophobia, misogyny, cultural warring, and prosperity gospel. So, people say, and you've heard me say, Jesus died at the hands of political systems, and we should care about that. But this is Christian nationalism that is on the rise and is I believe a dangerous phenomenon in our nation. So we xenophobia. We're afraid of others. How do we treat women? And the culture wars are still very much a part of this dechurching movement. And then engaging the dechurch is complex but not impossible. That will be the focus of our next meeting. So this isn't going to be an easy journey for us to say, okay, what are the 3 or 4 programs we're going to put together? This would be a cultural shift for us, probably, which I think we're already beginning. I mean, with our inclusion statement, with what we're trying to be and who we are trying to be in terms of all people, and that all means all, right? I mean, it's not just it's everyone, LGBT plus community, the BIPOC people, people of economic status. I mean, Ruth and I have been in a church that we served in a church that the economic status is one that is really an interesting. People will de-church over their economy. If they can't give anymore, they feel like there's not a place for them in church. When we went to a church, it was right in the middle of one of a low time of economic prosperity in our family and in this church, or in the church and individuals. And I was told about people who hadn't worked for months and yet they were still going to church. And I thought that was unusual. Ruth pointed that out to me. She says, honey, this is a really special place because people are still coming to church even though they've lost their jobs. They're not able to give. However they're living day to day, they were still welcomed and valued and a part of that community. And I think those are things that we need to think about in terms of welcoming people into our church and making them feel valued all across the board. So that's like not quite a water hose, but just a lot of things that are, this, and this is me, and everything that's in here, it goes to the authors of a church. I should have given them credit right from the go, get go. I did not do this in a very good way in terms of having what's that? Bibliography. I didn't have the bibliography which says this came from this page, this page, this page. I was just trying to get as much information on as short of possible. So what are our thoughts? Is this a worthwhile conversation to have? Just want to say hello again, girl? Eve? Okay, she's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
The mention is
Okay, very good. Here we go.
In the introduction, it mentions the first Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening. What are those?
First Great Awakening was in the late 1700s, and I think the second Great Awakening was, I want to say, post-Civil War. There were just huge areas of growth in the church, in Christian churches. Yeah, so the 1700 would have been more of a European, with the Wesleys and the Reformers. Would have been a huge way of doing that. But I think I've got those right. I can look those up for you specifically. And then with the Billy Graham Crusades, which would have been like the 60s and 70s, were huge. That was a huge influence on the world. I mean, here in the United States and across the world. But yeah, those would have been the Great Awakenings, maybe the part of the Reformation or post-Reformation. And then the second one would have been it was World War II, or it's not World War II, Civil War. People returned to the church after Civil War.
We had a big uptick in attendance after 9/11.
For how long?
Months.
Months? We had an uptick for a while. I mean, that first Sunday after 9/11 was huge. And of course, we had other services as well. We had, but it faded pretty quickly. I don't know. We were already pretty healthy and growing at that time, so I don't know if that was an anomaly or whatever. Patty, what was your experience of 9/11? Past 9/11 uptick in attendance, certainly. Really? In Colorado at that time? You were in South Dakota at that time, So you probably have more questions than we have answers for today, but this is just the beginning. We are going to spend next time talking about how do we engage with the dechurched, people that you might know that once were part of the church and are no longer. They just never found another spiritual home, or they moved away. And we have members now who have moved away who have reconnected with us through online. They're here. They're in church more than some people who live in, a couple miles away. Some of our folk, but they're, a very active part of our congregation in terms of attendance and study. Join us on Wednesday evening study online. So, do you want to say anything? You've been reading the book as well. Oh, you're not yet. Okay. You have the book.
I have the book. I haven't read it. We had several people that attended online. I'm not sure if a lot of them walked away and made lunch or if they're really out there. Hi, everybody, if you're still out there. I know a couple people are. So what we're going to do is I will put on our website a link to these notes. We're also recording this, so we'll put a link to that, a link to the book. And then I watched a really good podcast, so I kind of got the Cliff's Notes of this, by one of the authors of the book. And I'll see if I can find that again. It was about an hour, a little bit over an hour, and it was really good. It was two pastors. One of these is a pastor, and he was talking about their findings. He also mentioned a Substack that you can go follow, which is one of the people one of the main researchers for this, and they continue to do research and post stuff on their Substack. So if you're into that, might be something you want to do. Anyway, so we'll do that, and we'll keep adding to it as we have these sessions.
Excellent. You heard it from the person that's going to make it happen, so there you go. Thank you, Robin. Invaluable member of our staff, and as well as others as well. So all others. Yes, yeah, Villette?
as I look around, we're all members of age, so to speak. I hope that we'll be able to lean on the younger people who are here and get more younger people that can give their ideas, because we're kind of stagnant in the old people that are here.
Churches are, we're living, breathing organisms, and I think that, you're right. You don't see a lot of youth here, but we still have. How many are in youth group now? We took a big hit last year with a lot of seniors graduating, but still got 6 or 7 people most Sunday afternoon, evenings. So, except for tonight, you're not coming to church. So, all right. Is there no school tomorrow too? Oh, all right. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. We've done better. Patty is doing good work in terms of the program that is happening during the week. But it's worship is it's a challenge to get the younger folk to come back. Yeah. Unless we create some type of space. I think I lucked out early in my ministry when I had that. I mentioned it during my ministry. We had a very, very small balcony at Grosse Pointe United Methodist Church where Ruth and I met and married, and the youth just took it over as their party place. Did they listen to the sermons? Probably not, but then when I would preach, I did have a way of getting them to listen, because the big movie during that time was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, so I would try to use the word excellent in my sermons, and every time they did, they'd get up and do the air guitar. So. Hey, I'm a shameless person in trying to keep youth involved. So I'm going to pray us out, if that's okay with everybody else, unless we have a lot of other questions, and we'll keep working on this. We will be meeting the third week, the 16th of March next month, and then we'll go to the fourth week, because the third week in April is Easter, and we probably won't do this after Easter, so after Easter service. So let's pray. Gracious God, there is a lot of information here, and in all the studies and all the categories and all the things that we're just now breaking the surface of. Help us to see the work of your Holy Spirit and moving our hearts toward a situation in which we can engage with the unchurched or the dechurched and gain them back into our fold. Reach out in meaningful ways to those that need you, God, and we ask that your blessing would be upon us in those efforts as you guide us, as you give to us a sense of wisdom and a sense of joy in doing this work. We ask for this in the name of Christ our Lord and through the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. Thanks for staying afterwards. I know that might be a little longer than what we thought, and thanks for being online with us.